I know about where the halfway point is on the slides, and if I'm not there in half an hour, I'll skip something. So we will walk. Yeah, John will walk out, and you can follow him. When does it get dark these days? 7:30. Yeah. Well, it's for 2 hours. That's fine. Say again? Yeah, exactly. Right. Okay. So that's me in the Dead Sea. Classic shot. There we go. It's really true. You kind of get into it, and the trick actually is you bob in. You think, really? And then you kind of lean back, and it pushes your legs up. The cardinal sin is make sure you lean back, because if you don't lean back, it flips you forward, and that's not good news. So there we go. No, I didn't see anyone do it, but apparently that's the thing. Okay, what I thought I'd do first is to help orientate kind of why there's significance, thinking about the land, so the land and that kind of thing. You'll have heard the phrase the Fertile Crescent, I imagine. And for ages, I didn't know what that means. What that means is talking about is literally the crescent there, the Fertile Crescent. So you see Egypt here, you see kind of the land of Israel here, modern-day Turkey, so there's Istanbul, and then the Syrian Empire would have been there. You'd have had Syrian Empire there. You'd have had the Babylonian Empire there, the Persian Empire come from here. So it's hugely significant. But of course, in the middle of it is the Syrian desert. You do not, unless you're mad or you've got modern equipment, walk that way. And therefore, to connect Africa, Europe, and Asia, you go along this bit, because that's where it's flat, that's where you can get to. Otherwise, you can't go across the desert, you've got sea there. So if you want to get an army, for example, to walk through, that's where you go. And therefore, this tiny little strip of land here, where God said for his people to be, is hugely significant geographically. That's why you get the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, etc., the Greeks, the Romans, all really interested in this strip of land. Not because they, I don't know, like Mount Zion or something. It's because that was a hugely significant trade and military area. Now, I have, here we go, here's a map. So, and the geography really matters. So, you've got the, this is the Sea of Galilee here, you've got the Dead Sea. This is kind of desert, the plains of Moab there, but this is all desert. So, you get your fingers. So you think that's sea. Sea, flat, hilly, flat, hilly. Say that with me. Sea, flat, hilly, flat, hilly. You've got the land of Israel. It really is, and I knew that in theory, but I didn't appreciate it until I went there. That's flat. So that's the army, all the armies wouldn't have come across anywhere it'll all have come down this bit. And basically any major army, well, the ancient right through to Napoleon, First World War, marching their armies down through that. Kind of the plain of Sharon. You drive up a very old walkway there. But then that's hilly. That's where you have Mount Gilboa, where Saul, next to Saul dies. You have the hill country of Ephraim. So think Shiloh, Ramah, all those kind of places there. Jerusalem's there, Bethlehem's there, Hebron's there. It's all just a big set of hills. There's a bit of a gap, and up here it's hilly again. There's a bit of a gap here in the plain of Jezreel. Hence, Megiddo there, massively significant geographically because of where it is. It's the kind of choke point, again with Hazor, which is up here, which I'll talk about in a minute. But apart from the valley there, so you come down here and down there. Flat hilly, flat hilly. Right, okay, now, what I'm going to do is, as I'm talking, I bought two of these, one for home and one for work. And it just gives you the sense of the hilliness. So you can pass that around over the next hour, just pass, when you finish poking it, you can, but it gives you the sense, it really, that's flat next to the sea, then it rises up into the mountains, then it goes right down. Jericho is the lowest place on earth. And that's Jericho, it's just there. And then you go up into the hills. Sea, flat, hilly, flat, hilly. That's helpful just as we go through. Now, we'll start off with Galilee. So the Sea of Galilee then in the north, that is that's not seawater. That's water coming down off all these hills here. I deliberately haven't got any notes, so I don't go on for too long. It's at least 100 meters below sea level. I think it's significantly more than that. And you see it just goes down from off the mountains down into the Sea of Galilee. And this northern bit is where Jesus did quite a lot of his ministry. You see Capernaum's there, Chorazim's just there, Tiberias, which was just being built, Bethesda, where Philip was from, and Peter and James almost certainly grew up. You've got Cana, where Jesus performed his mirth miracle, Nazareth, where he grew up and then was kicked out and rejected, so took up home with Peter and his house. So that's a hugely significant area. And therefore you can swim in it quite nicely. You can drink out of it because it's all fresh water. In fact, this is right at the bottom of the Sea of Galilee, where you can actually swim around this little, we actually did it, you swim around this little bit and you swim down to the Jordan. So I swim from the Sea of Galilee into the River Jordan. It's good fun. It's massive. 13 miles long, 8 miles wide, if I remember rightly. If you're someone like a fisherman like Peter or James, and that's really all you've seen, you call it the Sea of Galilee. If you're more traveled like Luke, and you've seen the actual sea, you call it the lake. Hence the different ways in which the gospel writers describe it. I went for an early morning run the first morning and took that picture out. This is from the west side, and had a lovely little experience with the sun coming through. It's really popular with water sports. Really popular. It's fresh water. It's great fun. That's over here, right in the distance, is where you just saw that picture taken from. This is from the northern end, in Capernaum, which is there, which I'll talk about more in a minute. In fact, I think I'll talk about it now. That view is one that Jesus would have seen thousands of times, because he stayed in Capernaum for not an insignificant part of his ministry, where Peter had his house. And that's basically just from the Capernaum beach out over, looking directly south, down over the sea. And that's Peter's house. So you can see that middle building. I think I've shown you this before when I was preaching through Luke. But that probably is Peter's house. It's got signs around it. Different buildings were built around it, sites for veneration, Christian graffiti within. And the only reason you did that is if you were venerating it as a significant site. And in Capernaum, that's other than the synagogue, which is just around the corner, just behind where they took the picture. That is a room where Jesus would have spent many nights, many, many, many nights. And a big church building was built over the top of it, but they've left it so you can see inside. That's me standing in the synagogue, and it was baking hot that day. But that's me standing where the teacher would have taught from. Now, this is interesting. This is a Moses seat. This is a reconstruction of the original, which is in the Jerusalem Museum, I think it is. And that's the kind of seat that the rabbi would have sat on, to sit down, and to teach. And one of that was found. That's not from Capernaum. That's actually in Chorazim, which is just up the road, where the old synagogue was dug up. Just along the bit, this is Chorazin. Woe to you, Chorazin, Jesus says. He pronounces judgment on the city, and basically no one's lived there since. It's quite a thing. But here you can see one of the mikvahs, one of the kind of washing, cleansing pools, and there were loads of them around. They took their outward religious observance really seriously. The problem was the problem of the heart, and that's what Jesus denounced them for, and so it fell into misrepair. This is up in the hills, looking down to where Capernaum is, but then up into the hills, and Bethsaida's up here. I imagine somewhere in this shot is where Jesus preached Sermon on the Mount. Up in the hills, just above, and it's just great acoustics for somewhere to find a spot where you can preach to thousands of people, a lot of people. This is where the River Jordan goes into about to go into the Sea of Galilee from the north. This is, so if you go back. Okay, so on this side is the kind of Gentile side. And the picture I'm about to show you was taken here, basically about here. And therefore, somewhere within this shot that I have taken is where the pigs would have run down into the Sea of Galilee. So he goes over the lake into Gentile territory, and he meets the demoniac who's in exists in one of the tombs. You can quite easily understand how tombs could have been cut there. And he casts out the demons into the pigs. They run down the hillside. You can see the hillside somewhere in this shot, and they run down into the lake. Would have been quite something. Okay, so Hazor, so the Sea of Galilee, we've been up here, and that's in the kind of the flat bit with the valley. The Jordan River Valley goes right down through the land. Now, so we talked about Megiddo. Key point is the walkway where the armies would have come. Another one is Hazor. I was tempted to do both. I'm not even going to attempt to do both. Talk about Megiddo and Hazor. But they are absolutely fascinating. So imagine you are in a fort on top of Hazor and looking up this way where they're kind of in between the mountains where the armies would have come down. That's what you're looking at. So there's the mountain, and then you kind of come, I think Mount Hermon, if I remember right. And then you kind of come down. And therefore, as you go, if you think of it like a layer cake, if you go down in the archaeological layers in these places, you can see fort, and then fort, and then fort. It's even more striking at Megiddo, where you've got about 20 different of these different ones, and they dug them all up quite recently, and you can go to see them. You go up the mount, you go up the hill, and they've found the different gates to the different bits of it. Absolutely fascinating. But of course, you can't dig up all of one, because you dig up all of one, then you get rid of the others. So it's quite clever in the way they've done it. But this is Hazor. It's a Canaanite. So this is an ancient Canaanite. This bit here is an ancient Canaanite sacrificial altar. And if you know your Testament, it's grisly. Child sacrifice, the whole lot. The one at Megiddo actually is much more pronounced. So you see here, that's kind of 6,000+ years old. And you see the steps going up onto the altar. So in the Old Testament, in Exodus, I think it is, talk about when you go up the steps to the altar. Those are the kind of steps. Obviously, the Israelites' altar would have been used for something very different. But there we go, grisly stuff. So the Canaanites were there, and obviously existing in the land. But then you get to where the conquest. So you think Abraham, I'm going to round up to Abraham 2000 BC. The Israelites leaving Egypt come into the land, probably about 1450, but let's say 1500 BC, and they're going to conquest the land eventually, and they are met with fierce resistance because there's a very well-established civilization is there. These aren't kind of these are well-established military civilizations, and this is the Jabin's palace. So Jabin, Judges 4 and 5. Here we go. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Now, Ehud, this is when they're in the land now, Ehud was dead, so the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin. Jabin is the name of the king, like Pharaoh, you pass it down, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor, Sisera. The commander of his army was based in around there because he had 900 chariots, So this is his palace. So we went inside and imagine him sitting there, and you can see it going round. And Sisera is the guy who gets the tent peg through the head. This is where they'd have planned all that kind of stuff. So it's all there. It was a hugely established civilization, and archaeologists, wonder they had this huge, over 200. I think Hazor is over 200 acres of land was occupied by this civilization around Hazor. And then almost overnight it disappeared. I think, well, what happened? Well, we know what happened. The Israelites came along, and it was found under a meter of ash, because they burned it. The Bible tells us they burned it. Solomon then comes along, and he builds up gates in lots of these places, so that you can go to Megiddo and see the gates there. But these are the old gates to Hazor, which Solomon built, and you can't really see it there, but I think, here we go. When they talk about gates of these old cities, this is what they'd look like. So there'd been walls all around, but the gates, you see, it's like an E, and an extra bit as well, so they're easier to defend, bows and arrows and that kind of thing. So when the gates, and therefore you'd sit at the city gate, there'd be a place just outside here, and that's when lots of the kind of business done, and inside too. So the city gates. Then Ahab comes along. Ahaz comes along and decides that to defend these kind of places, we need some water. Because, of course, what do you really need when you're being attacked? You need to protect your water source. And so here at Megiddo, he builds these huge water cisterns going down. I mean, I forget, I meant to remember the exact figure, but you go down a long way, a long, I don't think I've got another picture now, a long way, and then down to the water source. Hugely impressive engineering. He wasn't an impressive king morally, but engineering-wise, he was hugely impressive. Now, this is where it gets even murkier. This is a place of worship. See that little pole? That is a phallic symbol for ancient Canaanite religion to the god Ashtoreth. The problem here is that this is built by Israelites. This is at Hazor. So you can imagine, can't you, that you have, you take over the land, you conquer it, and then you say to the local Canaanites, okay, how do you kind of make food? How do you, any tips, top tips for gardening here? And they say, well, actually, to get the rains to come and to get it all to work, what you need to do is you need to make sacrifices to the god Baal and the female god Ashtoreth by offering things that are important to you, and they will do their thing in the heavens, therefore, and that will produce, make the land fertile. It'll send the rains, and it will make your crops work. And so you see, written again through the Old Testament, God's people being suckers for this. So this is the Baal, and you see arm out, and you always see him with the legs up like that way. So he's throwing a lightning bolt. The idea, he's throwing kind of rain and stuff to make the land go. And therefore, all sorts of shady stuff would have happened here. You'd have offered sacrifices of things that are lots of worth to you, and of course, what's the most precious thing you have? You have your kids. And of course, therefore, if you want to help them to have sex in the heavens, you'd go to the temple prostitutes and do your thing there. And that's Israelite built. That is the Israelites, God's people, giving in and going with the Canaanites' religion, and bad things happened. But that's just, you can see, just a little example of it. You can see what the Bible is being talked about, being worked out actually in the archaeology that's there. A tragic scene. Okay, how are we doing? Right. Okay. Over to Bethlehem, down to Bethlehem. So, hold on, I haven't got a map anywhere near this. I won't even try that. This is the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem. This has been built up at different points. You see this, there's a door here. This is the kind of, so we're thinking in the site of Jesus' birth. This is a door here. Now you can see this bit. When it was first, this church building was first built a long time ago. It had a big, great door, and then gradually they made it smaller. And then now, I don't think I put the picture in. You walk in, I had to kind of get down like that to get in, a tiny little door. And the reason they kept putting it further down was so you couldn't get a horse. You couldn't kind of ride your horse into it, because that made it easier to destroy, etc., and overrun. But you go inside. Now, this is an extraordinarily old building. I'll talk a bit more about this when we get to Jerusalem. But certainly the original part of this was built 325-ish AD by Helena, Constantine's mum. And the reason for the site, in fact, I'll talk about the site in a minute. The Persians came in 612 and destroyed the equivalent over in Jerusalem, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But they kept this because they went in and saw the Magi depicted up there, dressed in Persian dress. So thought, we can't burn this. They're one of our guys. So they left it standing. There we go. It's kind of them. But anyway, so why this particular site? With all these things, just see past all the ornaments and all that kind of stuff. Just see past all that. Now, underneath this bit here, the altar, is the significant bit. Because underneath there is a series of caves. So this bit is the cave that we'll pay particular attention to. Now, I didn't know this before I went, but there is very, very early testimony that is the cave that Jesus was born in. Now, when we think of stable, we think wooden structure like a garage next to a house, yeah? That's what we think of. But that wouldn't have been what you'd have thought of in terms of the original understanding of the word. It was a bit that was attached to the house, but it wasn't uncommon in those days to build your house next door to a cave. Obviously, because if you build your house next door to a cave, you've automatically got a massive extension. The place to store stuff, yeah? In fact, the way we get the word grotto from the word that means cave, interestingly. And 150 AD, a guy called Justin Martyr, who was friends with Polycarp, who was friends with the Apostle John, he's writing about Christianity. He's writing about, and arguing for Christianity against people who are saying it's all rubbish and all the rest of it. And he basically says, guys, I will take you to the cave. I'll take you to where it happened, where Jesus was born. And you can imagine, if you can put yourself in the disciples' shoes, and in this generation or two that come after the disciples, Mary's still around in Jerusalem, and you've got Bethlehem, which is 5 kilometers south of Jerusalem. Well, that's nothing. So and you're interested in all this stuff, it's the death and resurrection of Jesus, the birth of Jesus. I'm convinced Mary did show people, a number of people, where it happened. You can imagine that, can't you? And you see very, very early Christian witness to this place, this particular cave being where Jesus was born. Then you have Origen in 250 and Jerome in 325, making exactly the same case. We will take you to the cave. We know where it happened. In fact, Jerome, I'll get to the pictures in a minute, but Jerome actually set up camp in this cave. He came to the land of Israel to brush up on his Hebrew for his Latin translation of the Old Testament, later known as the Vulgate, in the vulgar tongue, in the common tongue, so that people could read it in their own language. And he did it in that room there. And he wanted to do it because it was close to that. And so you go down underneath the altar area, and again, look past all of this stuff. It's just a cave. But very, very early Christian testimony is that is the cave where Jesus was born. Does it matter? No. But it's interesting. There we go. And you can go there. And of course, what they've done is they built little things there and said, that's the exact spot. And then that bit there is the exact spot where, all the rest of it. No. But the testimony very early is that is the cave where it happened. There we go. There were lots of that. Okay. Now, just outside of Bethlehem, just to the south of Bethlehem, is this place. This is the Herodian. It is you kind of come down through the valley and look and you see it kind of coming up, and it just looks like a Bond villain lair. This is the place where Herod built one of his great palaces, and he basically took the one hill and moved the hill and built up this great place. You see the big amphitheatre there and that kind of thing. Herod would have spent a lot of time there. I actually went into Herod's bathroom in there in his dining room and that kind of thing. He used to kill people. There's a swimming pool just around here. He used to drown people for fun. There was a reason why he was paranoid about being killed, because a lot of people didn't like him for good reasons. But that's the place almost certainly where Herod would have sent the troops out to kill the slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem, which is just next door. The troops would have gone from there. Right, now why do I do that? Yes, okay, so we started north. We've just taken a quick trip to Bethlehem. So imagine, therefore what you do is you can drive down past Mount Gilboa, interestingly. There's some lovely pools in Beth Shan there, but can't talk about that now. Past the flat, it gets flat, then you're just driving between two, kind of big valley, down between two mountain ranges, the Gilead, the hill country of Gilead, Jabesh, Gilead, all that kind of stuff, where David spent a lot of the time legging it to get out of the way, because you're up in the hill country. And the hills here, and you drive down through the Jordan Valley, following just to the right of the river, and you get to Jericho, which is just here. So if you imagine you're in Jericho, it's 1450-ish and BC, and you see those people have got to come out round this side, and they cross. You watch them cross the Jordan and coming towards you. That's what you'd see. This is from on top. This is on the fort in Jericho. Those are the plains of Moab. You can't see it very well. The Dead Sea is just here, and you see the Jordan River. You see where it's a bit green there? That's around the Jordan River. There's basically nothing there, and then suddenly you've got all these palm trees because of the spring, and here it's the lowest place on earth. And yet, extraordinarily, there's water, there's a spring that just comes out here, actually, in this building here. And they've kind of they've built a way to kind of just take it directly from the spring and then distribute it around the city. So this is the hill fort in Jericho. So that picture was taken underneath the shade, just here, looking that way. So that way, you're looking towards the River Jordan. This way is mountains. So you see, here we go. So you see the mountains rising up there, and then it's a kind of panoramic shot. And so you see the people of Israel were coming over there, and you're kind of situated on the top hill fort in Jericho, and you're thinking, we've heard about what these guys are like, and this might not go very well. And indeed it didn't. It's very old. It is perhaps they say it's the world's oldest city. This is believed to be pre-pottery age, this bit here. So it's like 8,000 years ago, BC-ish. It's all-ish, isn't it? But incredibly old. So that's before we got there, obviously. But that's when they dug down. So this is the fort. Now, you see this wall here. That's what we're interested in. So that's what I'm going to do now. That is the right age to be the foundations of the walls of Jericho in the Bible. That's the right bit in terms of the dating. Foundations, because it's in the walls didn't last very long, as we know. Interestingly, there is at least a possibly 500-year gap in the archaeological record that they still haven't explained. Interesting. After that particular period, of course, the water was cursed, wasn't it? Which is why people couldn't live there, because you need the water supply. The water's not there; you can't live there. And I think it's Elisha who lifts the curse, so you can drink Jericho water, and it's lovely. Can recommend. Now, this is just a bit of fun. So, I don't know how far you think an arrow how long an arrow would be shot from, but let's say it was, 100 meters or so. That's where the wall is. That's where our bus was. So maybe it was around about here that if you're walking around the city with the Ark of the Covenant, you're not going to do it. You're going to do it outside of arrow shot. So maybe there or thereabouts is where the Ark of the Covenant would have walked as they processed round the old city. That's a bit of fun, because that's totally a guess, isn't it? But there we go. Oh, that's a sycamore tree in Jericho. Almost certainly not the one. The Taurus board would love you to think it is. But think Zacchaeus and Luke 19, where he climbs the tree. There we go. Now, okay, so we are in Jericho, and we're looking west. So remember, sea, right in the distance. Probably can't see it, actually. Flat, hilly, flat. So we're in the Jordan Valley. Jesus tells a story about a man who went up from Jericho to Jerusalem. You really do go up. Up through the desert. There's a wadi, there's a river that just goes up into the area. And that's the elevation. So you go from Jericho right the way up to the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem. And we walked up, or we drove up, sorry, we didn't walk. We drove up, and there's a lovely beauty spot here, and you get, I took that panoramic shot, so that's looking. So that's Jericho there, and right in the distance is the tip of the Mount of Olives. Apparently you can do from there to there in a day. Our tour guide said he did it. You can't do that now because they've closed the footpath that goes up from Jerusalem, up from there to Jericho to Jerusalem. Do you know why they closed it? Because recently a guy got mugged. Jesus once told a story about that. So, apparently, our tour guide said that apparently there's one guy who spent some time on at this particular point berating him, said you couldn't possibly, shepherd, because David would have spent some time in the hills around here shepherding. You couldn't possibly bring up sheep here. And he's going to spend a minute haranguing him, and then over the hill came a shepherd with some sheep. You just got to know where to lead them to green pastures. Hence, it's not like, here, or lead to green pastures. Well, it's everywhere. It's not the case with the Judean countryside, with the deserts. You need a good shepherd. So, to Jerusalem. This is looking down from the Mount of Olives, which is on the eastern side. You go down the Kidron Valley, up into Jerusalem, and that's the Temple Mount. Now that, the Dome of the Rock, is on the site where the Holy of Holies would have been. So you're looking down. These walls here were built by Suleiman the Magnificent in about 1500 AD, so they're much more recent. They're built on the site of the old walls. The walls would have been, 50 meters higher? So the walls, even themselves, would have been hugely impressive. I'll talk about more about that. More about that in a minute. Here we go. Okay, so orientate ourselves. So Mount of Olives, that's where we were. We're looking over down the Kidron Valley, the Garden of Gethsemane. I'm just going to skip over that. It may be that particular site, it may not be, but that's kind of the area. And you go down up into the temple. It really was, I hadn't appreciated the sense of it, but it really would have been in Jesus' time a temple with a city attached to it. It just would have dominated the city. So this is actually after the time, this would have been during the time of Jesus. Later on, a wall was built to try and protect it a third wall was built around here to try and protect it from the Romans in 870 AD, and that didn't work. So you see the temple here, the Holy of Holies in the middle, the outer courts, and what have I got next? Yeah, okay. You've got the Pool of Bethesda, which I'd like to talk about. So you've got the old city of David here, Herod's fortress, which would have been eventually used by Pilate. I think the trial of Jesus happened there. I've stood on top of there, on a building that's now been built later on top of it, and looked out. I don't think I've got that shot in this bit. But it's much closer than you think. You really can almost throw a stone's throw from all these various places. Now, Pool of Bethesda, this is cool. So up here is... now, there used to be a valley, Tyropoeon Valley that would run down here, that was filled up and constructed on, but they stopped the water and made a big pool here. And this is the shallowest part. Just here is the deepest part. I think it's 13 meters deep. Huge body of water. But there's a shallower bit that's just here that would have been just meant for kind of bathing and that kind of thing. And there was a tradition was that one of the gods they moved and it stirred the water, and the first person who got in it was healed. And of course, you see Jesus in John 5 walk up and say, "Forget the gods, let me do it for you." And he heals the guy at the Bethesda pool, and that's where it would have happened, which is quite cool. They dug it up. Interestingly, they dug it up. Before they dug it up, lots of people said John 5 says there's 5 colonnades. And people said there's no way you could get, there's no way that kind of construction was there. And then they did the archaeology and they found a building with 5 colonnades. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Lo and behold, John was right. So that's up there. Okay, here we go. So that's the old city wall. That's right, the temple wall. Now, this bit here, what happens is there's a huge revolt in around AD 70. The Romans come in and they basically trash Jerusalem, but knock down the temple walls. But what's left is still hugely impressive. Now, what I'm about to show you is stood about here, looking at this bit of the foundations of the wall, the old wall. So that there, the bigger ones, is the foundation of Herod's palace that Jesus would have spent a lot of time looking at. The old wall, this is the newer wall, the old wall would have gone up there, probably there about maybe, and it goes down further into the foundations. A huge, great construction. That's called the Western Wall. Pejoratively, the Wailing Wall, but the Western Wall, where Jewish people go, and you can go in here. The reason for venerating this particular bit is it's the closest place, apart from going up onto the Temple Mount, the closest place that you can get to where the Holy of Holies would have been. And then so they kind of use that to a prayer. They don't think they can go on top of the Temple Mount because they think the Shekinah glory is still there. It hasn't left, and so you can't go into the presence of God, it's said. It's massive. In fact, I don't think I've got a picture of it, but there's what's called the Herodian step. He kind of put his own little design on each of the stones. There's a little kind of step in it, and the top of each one. It's quite extraordinary. But here are some of the stones that were thrown down in AD 70, and just some of these were preserved. But they're massive, great things. Anyway, now, so when it would have been around, there would have been a bridge here going through, and then there's some shops and the Barclays Gate here. Here it is. So it would have gone up, and then these would have been shops. This is just with the wall just behind us here. Now, we went up onto the Temple Mount. We weren't sure we were going to be able to. It's always a little bit charged, as it were, but we were able to get up there. It's all a bit of a scuffle. This is, again, where you come up the bit we were just talking about, so the southwestern side. That is looking at what's on top of the Temple Mount. In terms of the history of it, so Jerusalem falls to the temple is destroyed in AD 70. Lots of other things happen, but the Persians come and conquer it in 612-ish, and build on top of the site of the Holy of Holies. They build this. It's the oldest Muslim shrine at the Dome of the Rock. It is a hugely impressive to look at building. It's beautiful. And it's basically a way of saying, God's greater than your God. That's how you do it. You build a temple on top of it. But you see the old structure, the site of it. It's massive. It's something like 20 to 30 football pitches in size up there. It's absolutely extraordinary in terms of its size. So the western wall's just here, the shops just here, and there'd have been different walkways and pathways up. But that's built on top of the site instead of where the Holy of Holies would have been. This is just an artistic impression. So this is looking from the other side, from the Mount of Olives, shops here, and the Holy of Holies there. So you see the height of the wall. Now this bit here is interesting. This is the colonnade to underneath here, and on top of it you'd have had the Sanhedrin. Now this bit here would have underneath would have been able to hold literally thousands of people. That's where the early church met, and you were literally meeting underneath the body that had Jesus killed. It would have been pretty incendiary. This is it today. Some of the colonnades, some of the remains of it here. Interestingly, it hasn't come out very well in the picture, but the only hairy moment we had in Israel was on top of the mount. There were some of these Hasidic Jews who were being followed by guys with machine guns. That's because sometimes these guys go up and like to try and recreate a synagogue on top of just by kind of praying, that kind of thing, and they kind of, it's all very tense. But that was the only tense part we had. But that's some of the colonnades there. So that would have been kind of there. Hugely impressive. That was another artistic impression. That's Imagine, because you're in part of it. So this huge, great structure that the early church met, and Jesus would have done a significant amount of his teaching in the shade, which is what you do. You go up to the top and you go around, and this is from the eastern side. If you go around the back, so the dome's just here. I'm next to where the Holy of Holies would have been, which is quite cool. So there we go. Now, okay, so we go from the Temple Mount to this bit. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. What you see, dear me, it's fine, it will dry. What you see here is not from 3:25, but let me talk about that in a minute. So it's the traditional site of the death and resurrection of Jesus. Right, now if you go back, if you went back 2,000 years ago, no, this isn't actually 2,000. This would have been the time. This would have been Jerusalem in 70 AD. So you see the third wall. That's the temple there. Mount of Olives would have been here. Western wall here. Pool of Bethesda here. That's north. This is the kind of western side of it then. This is the third wall that was built to try and protect it from the Romans. Imagine that's not there. So this is the city wall on the western side. Now, just outside, this is Herod's palace, etc., or old palace where Pilate would have set up digs. Now, just outside here was an old quarry that we know was an old quarry and then turned into a garden and was used for lots of things, for burial. I'll talk about that in a minute, but was also used by the Romans for crucifixion. It's just outside the city wall. It's a great site if you're going to publicly execute criminals. You buy the different pathways. There would have been a gate there. You see the old gate. And it's a great site for killing people, and we know that even from the secular records. So you see there, kind of an old quarry garden area. And that, it is said, I think reliably, that is where Jesus was killed. There's an alternative site called up here, but that's where General Gordon in the 18th century, maybe 19th century, turned up, rocked up, and saw a rock that looked a little bit like a skull. And I said, oh, that can be the site. It's just a rock that looks like a skull. But they also found a tomb there. But the tomb itself could be anywhere up to 1,000 years AD. So we don't know when that's. But it probably looks more like the original place would have done. But that's an aside. I don't have time to go there. I'm just trying to stick to this. So, in terms of the history of the site then, there's a massive revolt. In 70 AD, the Romans come in and say, oh, bang, none of that, thank you, we're going to kind of kick you out and burn down your temple. There's another Jewish revolt in 132, 133, and at this point they say, right, the Romans say, right, we want to remove all we want to make this not even a hint of being Jewish. We want to stop this. And so they smashed Jerusalem and they desecrated this particular site by building a temple to Jupiter and another one of their gods. They build it on top. Again, what do? You build a temple to your god on top of the significant site of their god. My god's better than yours. 'Twas ever thus. And that's what they did. And this is, Eusebius writing, the Romans brought a quantity of earth from a distance with much labor and covered the entire spot. It's a quarry, so it's got lots of kind of holes in it and that kind of thing. The entire spot, talking about this spot, and buried it. Then having raised this to a moderate height, they paved it with stone, and then you build your temple, so that it's covered. But they do it on that spot because that's the spot that the Christians are gathering to remember the death of Jesus. It's a very deliberate thing. And Hadrian, who's ultimately responsible for this, had a little coin minted, and that's those particular gods being talked about there. Similarly, Origen of Alexandria, so those are his dates. He, again, arguing, I think it's against the Gnostics or against the heretics, I can't remember which one it is. He talks about that particular site as being the place. Seal of Jerusalem again. That's sorry, I'm mixing up against the Gnostics. And 3:15 again says, "Look, I can take you to the place. It happened here. It happened there." But then, as the game-changing moment in history, really, a guy called Constantine becomes a Christian. The emperor of the Roman Empire becomes a Christian at the Battle of Milvian Bridge in 312 AD. And that's a game changer, because previously you'd have lots of Christian people, Romans becoming Christians, but you still have the kind of pagan rulers in charge. Now you have a Christian in charge of the Roman Empire. And his mum has, I don't know in which order it happens, but his mum also becomes a Christian, Helena. And she travels to this area and says, right, where did this stuff happen? Let's build, we've got power, we've got money, let's build some churches where this stuff happened. And so she builds so she builds the Church of the Nativity in Jerusalem, in Bethlehem, the church we just looked at. And she builds two others, one I think in Nazareth, I forget what the other one is, but the Church of the Holy Sepulchre on this site. So they knock down the Jupiter temple, and they excavate, and they kind of dig it up, and they build, because they know the particular sites, and they dig it up and build their own church. That's her. And this is what she'd have built. It looked quite similar to the original bit of the Church of the Nativity, because they're built by the same people, same design. So you see the dome there over the place traditionally where the Jesus was buried, and they found a tomb area underneath a particular point. They kind of found a tomb thing. And then you can just see the cross poking out here. They kind of buried up the quarry where that particular point where it had been venerated, and that was exposed, and then you had the other stuff here. So you've got a dome, and then this bit which would have been left exposed, and that would have been venerated. So that's 325-ish. Well, yeah, just after that, around that time. Now, a lot happens since then. A lot happens since then. You can see where it's kind of exposed, the rock there. Amongst other things, the Persians come, as I said, in 612-ish, and they basically they burn the place down. They keep the one in Bethlehem, as I said, for the reason I said, but they basically smash this place down. They open the grave inside, and they torch it as much as they can, basically. And then a Christian emperor becomes in charge of Jerusalem again, and they can restore it a bit, and then it's destroyed again. But then the Crusaders come and build this, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. That dome is over the site of the old dome. And therefore, the traditional tomb of Jesus is in that bit, and the site of Jesus' death is in this bit here. You see the distances. Those are the historic sites. Here is inside. So you have the traditional tomb, and you go up a bit. You go up some steps here, and you've got the old rocky area here. So you see here how it could have been. That's under that, and that bit is under that. That's rock. That's inside the church. Again, see past all the kind of ornamentation and all the rest of it. But inside, on that up some steps, is part of the old quarry that they dug up. Now that might not be the spot, but for a Christian tradition, pretty reliably is that if not there or thereabouts, on the area of rock that would have been, is the site of Jesus' crucifixion. And then you walk, 20 meters, and you see this bit here, and inside here is the traditional tomb of Jesus. They took on, there's a grave inside, and they lifted up the lid recently, and there was an old slab of rock there that would have been the traditional place. Again, if not there or thereabouts. A long-standing Christian history and tradition. I went to Israel quite skeptical of Christian tradition on this kind of stuff, and I've come back slightly less on this stuff. Other stuff about, it happened exactly here, But actually, the sense, you can see, again, you can imagine, can't you, if you're Christians in the first 200 years, you're going to know. because those conversations get passed down. Again, people were skeptical. It couldn't have really happened there because there's no record of people being buried. And then you just walk through this bit, and they did some more digging just around here, and they found a grave from exactly this period, which shows that this in that quarry garden area, there would have been people being buried. That was a normal thing. That had to be from that particular point because it was banned soon afterwards, soon after Jesus was killed and raised. So that's from the first century. That's a first century tomb. How are we doing? We're doing well. You're right. Breakneck. Last site. So we're going to go down to the city of David. So this is as kind of it would have been in David's time-ish. So now imagine Mount of Olives, this bit, Kidron Valley here. So Gethsemane would be here. That's Mount Moriah. Interestingly, where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac. We heard this morning, Mount Moriah, that's Mount Moriah. What happens is that this is in Jesus' time. This is the city of David here. Oh dear. Solomon decides to build a temple on Mount Moriah, on that bit. So instead of knocking down your city, you build a big temple just next to it, and that's the site. See there, that bit is there. Jerusalem has a fascinating history, doesn't it? So you think Melchizedek, Genesis 14, he's the king of peace, and he's ruling over Jerusalem. That's long before David and co get there. It was a Canaanite city, so the Canaanites living in the land. And this is probably about what it would, possibly something of what it would have looked like. But you see, this is the key thing. Why build here rather than the higher mountains around it? So Mount Moriah, Mount of Olives, and loads of other mountains. Why would you build a city there? Question. Water. Because the Gihon spring comes out here. And so this is an ancient, I don't know whether this is meant to depict the Canaanite one or the one that David builds. But that is protecting the Gihon spring that comes out there, and then it gives you your water to be able to exist as a city. Now, this is a bit what it would look like. And so when David, I did this in my quiet time yesterday, on that day, David said, anyone who, so the Jebusites are in there, and they're thinking they want to conquer Jerusalem, and he says 2 Samuel 5, on that day, David said, anyone who conquers the Jebusites will have to use the water shaft to reach those lame and blind, who are David's enemies. In other words, the weakest bit is the water shaft. That's how you're going to get in. And lo and behold, they did. That's the Canaanite water shaft. They've dug it up. It's all kind of underground, but they kind of exposed it. And it's an extraordinary, impressive piece of engineering. So this is, so David's about 1000 BC-ish. So David, you build it up, you protect it yourself. But then Hezekiah, so I think 7th, 8th BC century, Hezekiah is the king, and he's worried about the Assyrians. It is the Assyrians, isn't it? The Assyrians coming and laying siege and taking the water, because that's how you defeat Jerusalem. You stop the water, and it means that you die, which is bad. So this is what Hezekiah, 2 Chronicles 32. When Hezekiah saw that Sennacherib had come and that he intended to wage war against Jerusalem, he consulted with his officials and military staff about blocking off the water from the springs outside the city, and they helped him. Later on, it was Hezekiah who blocked the upper outlet of the Gihon spring and channeled the water down the west side of the city of David. In other words, he says, let's build a tunnel or a system that means it never actually goes above ground, and that actually guarantees our water source. Smart. And he did. This is Hezekiah's tunnel. So now the wall is extended this way, and see the temple there. David's palace would have been up here. It's quite a view, actually, from where the palace would have been down the hill. It really is down the hill. I stood on top of a building there. But anyway, the Gihon spring comes out there. It literally just kind of bubbles up out the ground. I stood at the place right underground where it bubbles up. Quite something. And what they did is they built a tunnel that goes from there down to the pool of Siloam right at the bottom. It is an extraordinary piece of engineering. It is 532 meters long. It is 0.6 percentage gradient, which is extraordinary, you would think. So in terms of it can't be really, it's got to be very gradually so the water can go down. It's an extraordinary piece of engineering when they think they did that without lasers and all these other things. And here you can walk it, and I did. You have to use a torch, and you have to wear shoes because it's quite slippery. But you're walk through water. I think the most it was about that deep, and it kind of goes down and down, and it goes from the Gihon spring, and it goes for about 500 or so meters, and it is absolutely extraordinary. As you kind of walk through, that's the bit where it turns around, but it's mostly straight. You're just walking straight and hanging onto the person in front of you. At different points you had to bend down, but most of the time I was able to just to walk it. And in the middle, there's an ancient thing which is from when it happened, which is basically the builders saying, noting the place where they dug it from either side and where they met in the middle. And it's I forget the translation, but it basically said we hit our hammers to celebrate it. Yeah, quite something really. That's in the middle of it. There we go. So you walk it and you go from there, and it spits you out. You just come out of it, and it trickles down to the pool of Siloam. That's it there, the old steps. Jesus would spend lots of time there, and they are currently in the process of digging it up still. That's an ongoing thing, and who knows what they're going to find there. But that is 33. I would have taken that. There we go. That is a whistle-stop tour. I have left out a huge amount, but I've tried to just give you a sense of, like, if you could just teleport into that spot and say, spot this, spot this, spot this, a sense of it. I should take your breath. I don't know what kind of questions you'd have, but if you have any questions, go.
325 a few times. Is that the case with Nicaea?
Yes. So Constantine becomes a Christian. I don't know why I put that back up there. Constantine becomes a Christian in 312 at the Battle of Milvian Bridge, and there's a big. If you go to Rome, there's a big arch which kind of celebrates that. But then he's like, okay, I want Christianity to be. It's said that he says he sees a sign of the cross, or the old Christian sign, in the sky, and he knows he's going to win the battle, and he does win the battle, so he becomes a Christian. Not the greatest reason to become a Christian, but it does seem that he was converted. He then says, right, okay, I want this to be the official religion of the world, of the Roman Empire. So what is it you believe? And the Christians are like, well, we'd never actually kind of been able to write this stuff down that much because you've been trying to kill us and it's hard to get together and all the rest of it. Okay, well, let's get together. So he got together kind of as many of the bishops and church leaders, around the world, around the Roman world, got them all together in a place called Nicaea, which is in modern-day Turkey, just down the road really from Istanbul, Byzantium, Constantinople, and gets them together at Nicaea, and they have a big fight with Arius, who's teaching that Jesus isn't really divine. Some of you might know about that. And there's a big debate, and it's said that Constantine delivers the expert bit of advice. It's like, why don't you say that Jesus is homoousian with the Father, that is the same substance? And people want to say, no, he's a similar substance. He's like the Father. He's like God. He's not truly God. And at the Council of Nicaea, they said, no, Jesus is truly divine. And that was where we get the Nicene Creed from. And from there flowed the other creeds of the Christian church, which essentially piggybacked them. But that was because Constantine wanted to say, this is what Christianity is versus this is what Christianity isn't. It was a hugely significant turning point in Christian history, actually. So there's the Edict of Milan in 313, which said that you've got to stop persecuting Christians. And in many ways, that did the church a great favour. But whenever persecution and hardship is lifted from the church, bad things often start to happen as well. And so, is it a net gain? Probably. But we lost some stuff as well, I think. That sense of being on mission. And parts of it, and then you had the Roman church from there. Yeah, but that's the kind of the history around the Nicene Creed. So hugely significant point in Christian history, really. Yeah. Is that a hand, Bella? Or is that a foot? Was that?
Did you go to Masada?
We did. Yes, I went to Masada. This is where I'd like to put some pictures up. So Masada is next to the Dead Sea. That's going to take me ages to go back. Masada is next to the Dead Sea. It's this fortress that Herod had built, again, massively paranoid, on top of this huge rock, 400 meters, I think, high. And he builds this fortress that's basically impenetrable. So you imagine a castle on top of a 400-meter rock that's surrounded by desert. Like, you're not going to take that. And so he builds this place called Masada. I went to up there on a baking hot day. And you get a beautiful view of the Dead Sea in the valley. And again, went in his bathroom, interestingly. Don't know why that's a theme. That, interestingly, is the place, therefore, long after Herod dies, where the last stronghold of the Jewish revolt of around 67 AD. So the Romans come and they smash Jerusalem, then they take out these various Jewish zealots, different places. But I think it's 73 AD, they go to Masada, and that's where the last stronghold of these Jewish zealots are holed up. The story goes that I'll tell the last bit of the story in a minute. What they do is they build a siege wall around, almost overnight, they build a siege wall around this huge, great castle rock to stop anyone escaping. And then they build a siege ramp over the space of about 3 or 4 months, literally a ramp that goes up, 400-meter cliff. They build a ramp that goes up, and the ramp's still there. It's absolutely extraordinary. They finish the ramp, and they're going to go in the night before, and I think there's 1,000 or 100, maybe it's 1,000 of them up there. And the story goes that they drew lots, the Jewish lots at the top, for who would kill who, essentially. And they went, a group of 10 were going to kill. Group of 10 were going to kill all of them, and then one would kill the other 9. So only one of them committed murder. Sorry, only one of them committed suicide. Sorry, so to avoid committing suicide. When the Romans burst in, the story goes, they burst in on the next morning, they find a massacre, what looks like a massacre, kind of mass killing, mass suicide, because they didn't want to be handed over to the hands of the Romans. All they found, the only people they found alive, was a woman and a few kids hidden in a cistern, because they didn't want to kill themselves. And that's how the story was maintained, and that's how they found out what had actually happened. So it's grisly, but nice view from the top. Would recommend. You can ask me. I sense you wilting. Thank you, because you generously paid for me to go. So I am hugely indebted to you as a church family for giving me the rest over the summer, but also the chance to go to some of these places. I wouldn't say it's brought it alive, because it was already alive in my mind, but that sense of perspective where things relate to each other really has already helped in my own my own understanding of some of the stuff. I'm hoping to preach 1 Samuel from the new year, and I've just been reading through 1 Samuel, and just the connections is really, really helpful. So the last thing I'll say is I went with Oak Hall, who were brilliant. They do a 10-day trip. I've actually been asked to go back as a speaker, so we'll see. But would recommend them too. Why don't I pray? We'll sing, and then we'll go home. Early bath. Father, thank you again for that Jesus really did walk this earth, that though we read it and imagine it in our minds, we thank you that there were people like us who saw him and spoke with him and touched him and heard him. We thank you that there really were people who carried his dead body to a tomb, and there really were people who saw him and touched him after he was raised from the dead. And we thank you, therefore, that there is no tomb with Jesus' body in it. Thank you that these are things that are long since useful for him. There is a sense that he is in heaven, and the gospel goes out from Jerusalem to Judea, to Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Thank you that we don't go to a place now, but we go to a person. And we thank you, therefore, that we have more access to you than even those through faith in Christ, than even the most zealous of religious person in Jerusalem. Father, we pray for those Jewish people in Jerusalem who pray at the wall and who long for the coming of the Messiah. We pray you would open their eyes to the truths of the gospel. Father, it grieves us that in the place where Jesus said what he said, that it is such a place of tension and bloodshed and division. But we recognize, Father, that in a sense that should not surprise us. We pray, Father, therefore, for the peace of Jerusalem, that peace would be brought to that land, that the bloodshed would stop. But we ask, Father, ultimately that you would send your Son back to this world, that he would bring peace to this world. And we ask that you would help us to remain faithful to the Lord Jesus as we wait for his bodily return. And we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's sing a Christmas song, but which talks about some of this stuff in terms of the sights.